We're now with Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Oksana Markarova. Did I say it okay?
Absolutely.
Mrs. Ambassador. Okay, so thank you for being with us in this special occasion, the Kyiv Jewish Forum, which is, part of the Ukrainian culture, and Jews have such a long history in Ukraine. So, Ambassador, maybe we should start from the beginning. From my perspective as an Israeli journalist, I've been covering the war from Ukraine from the first days, and I've been to Ukraine many times. But I was wondering if on October 7th, when the war in Israel broke out in 2023, did you see a change in the focus from Ukraine to Israel?
Thank you, and shalom to everyone.
Shalom.
October 7th is a horrible tragedy. And even though the support for the U.S., from the U.S. to Ukraine, whether public support or support from Congress, very strong bipartisan support from administration, did not change after that. If anything, actually, the horrible attack by another terrorist regime compared to the terrorist country regime or attack on Ukraine proves that we have to stay united and do more to stop terrorists everywhere. But of course, on the media, the attention was diverted. Mm-hmm. And understandably so. I mean, that was something that shocked the whole world. Ukraine keeps surprising the world the way we fight.
Yes.
Russians keep shocking the world with their atrocities, but it has been already for some time that everyone was following the aggressive war of Russia against Ukraine. So the packages have been announced, the support has been provided, but of course Ukraine stopped being on the news 24/7.
Right.
And that was a challenge.
And that's it for Ukraine. I mean, I think, it's not necessarily a good thing. Sometimes people want there to be quiet so they could do an operation and the world won't notice. But I think from Ukraine's standpoint, Ukraine needs the Western world. Right.
It's important for us to share the information. It's important for all the democracies, and U.S., Ukraine, all our countries are democracies, for people to know what's going on. Because in order to be able to support Ukraine, people need to know and hear about it. But also people need to understand why it is important for the U.S. to support Ukraine. Not just doing good thing for Ukrainians, but how this horrible attack from Russia is a threat to everyone who believe in the same values. So from that standpoint, of course, we need to be out there in the media as much as possible.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, dominating the media is something that is super important, definitely for Israel. And we feel like the world is moving on, unfortunately, and it's not always covering everything. And as you know, it's crazy in Ukraine and in Israel. People are being killed, houses are being destroyed, but the world's not necessarily keeping their attention there. So you were actually stationed here before, a bit before the war broke out in Ukraine. So where were you on that day? Like, what did you feel like? How did you react to it?
Yes, President appointed me in February, and I arrived here in April 2021. And almost right then, in April, May, if you remember, Russians started doing this so-called exercises and moving the staff to our border, and we have been...
And this is also before, obviously, there were the separatists, pro-Russia separatists, they used to be called, right, who were fighting, on the borders for many years,
Well, it was Russian invasion that started in 2014.
Then it was called pro-Russian separatists.
Russian called them that, but we knew
100%,
and we tried to explain to everyone that it's Russia who occupied Crimea and parts of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, and now they tried to do it on the false pretext, a full-scale invasion. It was obvious to us. We have been working here tirelessly with our friends saying, let's do preventive sanctions, let's provide more weapons to Ukraine, let's do everything to deter Russia from this. But then, of course, despite of everything we did together, Russia attacked. I remember that night very well. I spoke at Salgrave Club on that night, again, rallying the support and explaining to people how important it is to deter Russia when I have received the call that I have to report back to the embassy. And on the one hand, we all knew after Russia attacked us the first time that that's what they want to do. We all knew that Russia's intent did not change. We all knew that they do not have any moral lines or compass to stop them. But we still kind of hope that all the information and everything that we did together to show that the world is going to be united, that Ukraine will not surrender, will give them, some information to say it's not going to be an easy walk and Kyiv is not going to fall in 3 days. Now, unfortunately, that didn't happen, and that has changed the lives of all Ukrainians on that very day. I mean, definitely for me and my family as well.
So I wanted to also ask the same question I asked you about the Ukrainian war on October 7th, 2023, when Israel was attacked brutally by Hamas. Where were you? What were you thinking? How do you react to such a crazy situation?
That day as well, I mean, to the detail. I was traveling, I was in New York, and on that day I spoke at Cypher Brief. Again, it was online, talking about the risks from the Russian invasion, and then suddenly this horrible attack happens, which we did not see since the Holocaust. I mean, it was horrible, striking, and again, for all of us, it just reinforced, that the evil has to be stopped. And by that time, we already knew that Iran and North Korea and other dictators are working with Russia. Russia is helping them. So that kind of was like, okay, we had to be more decisive with Russia, all of us, in order to prevent something horrible like this. And we have to unite and do together. And of course, the next day I called my colleague, the Jewish ambassador here. We started working together. We had, in October, I believe, the hearing at the Helsinki Commission on Iranian drones, because what was used against Israel, we have seen that used against us over and over again. And, that's
I
another...
only realized that, I only internalized that. It's easy to speak or hear when, a day after the Iranian attack on Israel a few months ago with missiles and drones, and I spoke to an advisor of President Zelensky. And I said, it's interesting. It's the first time I actually internalized that we have the same threat. And the same drones have been sent at both of us, Iranian drones or Russian drones. But nobody, and he was telling me, I've been saying that for years, but nobody's been listening. And I didn't realize that until now. So, I think we definitely suffer from exact same ammunition created in the exact same place.
Even more so, the drones that Iran first started selling to Russia, and they were used against our civilians, our schools, our children, at the beginning, they have not been as effective. They were devastating, for civilians. They used their attacks in cooperation with Russia to improve them, to make these black drones, to make them less detectable. So it's either we all come together and actually stop the terrorists everywhere, or they help each other and they improve in order to kill peaceful people.
So I think it's interesting the fact that there's I think a majority of Jews around the world, definitely here in the U.S., and a majority of Israelis that support Ukraine. All the surveys showed that. But that said, the Israeli government is a bit different sometimes because of different diplomatic, security, or strategic situations, whether justified or not. But I remember at the beginning of the war, definitely the first month and the first year, there was such an amazing assistance of the Jewish organizations here in North America mainly. They gave money to Ukrainians and Ukrainian Jews. It was overwhelming. We're talking about substantial Jewish funds, and obviously it makes sense because there's deep history and culture connected with the Jewish community here in the U.S. I even wrote an op-ed back then saying, I'm proud to be an Israeli and I'm proud to be a Jew, because I was on the border twice between Ukraine and Poland. And I was there the first few days, and then I was there a few months later, and I saw this amazing work of these Jewish organizations and Israeli organizations who just popped up, and they came voluntarily and gave humanitarian aid. So I wonder how you saw it from your eyes. As a Ukrainian diplomat, you serve your country in the United States. So suddenly these Jews who are not necessarily directly connected are just donating and trying to help humanitarily.
Look, the support from the Jewish community here in the US has been enormous, and our cooperation with them ever since I arrived as an ambassador, that has been part of my day-to-day kind of operations, because frankly, if you look at Ukraine, the Jewish culture is inseparable from Ukrainian culture. And we started working here with the National Coalition for European Jewry, AJC, WJ, I mean, you name it, all Jewish organizations, the Anti-Defamation League. In 2021, that work was focused on also very important initiatives. So, for example, I was very honored to participate in it directly. And in 2021, Ukraine adopted the anti-Semitism, IRA definition of anti-Semitism. And not just a proclamation, not just making a public statement, but actually including it in our own legislation, which is important for us, and that's why Ukraine has one of the lowest rates of the anti-Semitism. But here working with
a lot before many Western countries.
Yes. And here working with Jewish organizations have been, especially since the full-fledged aggression, whether it's humanitarian support or support in relocations and to Ukrainian refugees, or doing something together on the Hill, together with other organizations here, we really appreciate it. And I have to tell you that support is still very high. We never had a situation. So when a horrible attack happened on Israel, it only brought us closer together, and we continued that cooperation, which already was on the basis. And we hear from all Jewish organizations how important it is for the world, for the U.S.
And then after the war broke out, I mean, huge amounts of money, huge amounts of equipment, support, right? I think it's...
Yes. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, so you mentioned that levels of anti-Semitism in Ukraine are very low, maybe even the lowest in Europe in general. So just last week, there was, if you recall, what we call a pogrom, which is something very dark in our history, an attack against Jews and Israelis in Amsterdam, people who came to a soccer match of Maccabi Tel Aviv, and they were attacked on an anti-Semitic basis. And I wonder if you see this spreading into other European countries, or even here in the United States, because it's not as popular in Ukraine. There may be a manifestation of this in other countries.
Well, look, you see it from time to time, unfortunately, in many countries. The main question, I guess, is how you react to that. For us in Ukraine, it's very important to put a decisive stop to it. So when there are incidents, and there are incidents from time to time of people, either doing something or shouting, in Ukraine, first it's punishable by law. Second, it's very important for the president, for prime minister, for everyone in Ukraine, for all of us to react to it and to educate also, because all this is based on lies and fakes and some lack of education sometimes. And look, anti-Semitism, as any type of xenophobia, is despicable, and we all have to fight.
So how exactly did you combat anti-Semitism in Ukraine, definitely before the war? And how were you able to implement the IRA definition? Even
during the war, look, first of all, we continue to teach in schools a lot, about Holocaust, about everything that happened. We commemorate all the events, especially those that happened on the territory of our country, from Babin Yar to others. The Holocaust Remembrance Days is something which actually draws attention from everyone in Ukraine. You see our president, you see ministers, prime minister, everyone there commemorative and saying to everyone, this should not happen. This is not something that a country that believes in democracy and human dignity and the values should tolerate. And I think, you see it even during the war. Some of the names, and I spoke about Vanda Abyatkova a lot, a woman who lived in Mariupol, woman who survived
the Holocaust,
the Holocaust and World War II. When she was a little girl, the woman who witnessed her parents being shot, she died during Mariupol siege by Russians because she was hiding in the basement, and so many situations like that. So unfortunately, what we hear, this anti-Semitic things that we hear from the Russian leadership, the final solution of the Ukrainian question. You just have to stay the course and explain and not tolerate it. And when someone brings it on, regardless of what circumstances is it used for. You have to react firmly and say no to that. And this is what Ukraine has big devotion to.
Right. I remember when in eastern Ukraine was starting to be taken over, in 2013, if I'm not
14,
mistaken.
yes.
14. I went to visit a refugee camp of Jews. And there was a woman who was a Holocaust survivor. And she was there with all of her medals, which is a very kind of, right, it's a very former Soviet Union thing. And she sang a Yiddish Amame, which is a very popular Jewish song about someone's mother. And I couldn't help but just cry because say, okay, this is a person who's displaced, for a second time, and she probably was, if she survived that, for a third time, because of a war with Russia, and it's just overwhelming to see that happens, and in a modern era when you assume that doesn't exist. So
Absolutely.
I think it's so finally we spoke about Russia's connections with Iran. On November 8th, as you know, it was published here in America that Iranians were trying to assassinate former president and president-elect Donald Trump. There were also lots of reports about intervention or trying to intervene in American elections by Russia and by Iran. We've also seen that lately a lot in Israel. Many spies working for Iran have been arrested. So I wonder, is this something that you say to yourself as an ambassador? Oh, finally, people are waking up because we've been, you've been ringing the bell for such a long time.
Well, it's, first of all, we all have to understand that this excess of evil, Russia is not doing it just by themselves. Iran and North Korea are clearly helping them militarily. There are others who are helping also through financial means. And we just have to understand that they will do everything from the military aggression to all the hybrid threats to all the everything they can do to undermine the democratic countries. We see it in Ukraine. They attacked us militarily, they do the propaganda, they do the cyber attacks, they do everything. And they're working together with Iran and North Korea. And if we will not stop them decisively in Ukraine, they will continue spreading and working everywhere. They're trying to undermine the support to Ukraine. They're trying to undermine the unity among all the democratic countries. So we see it all the time. I'm really glad to read the reports about it because we have to know about it, we have to analyze it, and we have to cooperate better to actually stop it and not allow this malign influence in all of our countries.
100%.
That will make all of us stronger.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add, I think in Israel, many people who didn't agree with that now finally understand, whether because of drones or because of cyber attacks or the many other elements and components in that situation, that maybe Israel should have done more for Ukraine. So I hope that sentiment of people coming together and making that voice is super important, and to promote more of this cooperation. I think many people in Israel have voiced that, and hopefully the government will internalize it.
My experience is people are smart. We just have to provide them with more information. We just have to be honest and open with them and just explain it to them. And then whether it's people in Israel or United States or Ukraine or any other country, they will understand how important it is for their own national security.
To give information in an era of misinformation.
We just have to try harder.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you so much for your time. And I would recommend, whether now or after the war, I've done so many tours in Ukraine about the Jewish history and the history of Zionism, which really was born in Ukraine. So I think the link between our two countries and Jews in Ukraine is tremendous.
Yes.
So Ambassador Markarova, thank you so much. And hopefully the war in Israel and the war in Ukraine should end, and the killing should end, and we should be able to rebuild and do big and better things together.
As we say in Ukraine, your words to the God's ears. Thank you.
Thank you.